This is the last chapter. Welcome, Dr. Jenkins. Last chapter in this course for lecture is about nutrition and the immune system. Pretty cool. This is a short chapter. I'll talk about the data that we know so far because we still have quite a lot to learn. But absolutely, without a doubt, your nutrition as a person, but also as an athlete, can absolutely influence your immune function. Here's our outline. We're going to go over the components of the immune system just to make sure that everybody has a basic understanding. And then we'll talk about what the research shows us about the effects of diet on the immune system and athletes. Okay, let's ask some questions before we get into the real information. I'm going to go with, let's go with pink. How about that? We'll end the lecture off by pink. Real men and women can use pink. Okay, does physical activity affect the immune system? Awkward pause. Yeah. Can exercise be good for the immune system? That's an interesting question. I guess we could look at that two ways. We could ask, can exercise be good to help make the immune system stronger? We could also look at it, what if you're a little bit under the weather? Can exercise actually boost your immune system's response to whatever it is that you're facing? The answer in both cases, although there's some caveats, is yes. If someone is sick, should they be exercising? Perhaps you've been in that scenario, you're not quite feeling well, and you don't want to lose a workout because then you're losing some fitness, but you also don't want to make yourself worse. It's a really tough question. The answer, as we're going to find out, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes it's better. You know what? Take the day off, take a couple days off, get your body right, and then when you come back, you'll be able to exercise back to your full potential. Can supplements help the immune system function better? We could talk about simple supplements such as vitamin C or a multivitamin, because we know vitamin C is an antioxidant. People think it also boosts the immune system. I'm going to let you stew on that one. And then we'll talk about what foods are best to maintain a healthy immune system. And we're going to find out, folks. Spoiler alert. It's going to include some fruits and vegetables. Shocking, isn't it? All right, let's do a little history. Now, if you're a sports fan, if you're a younger sports fan, younger than me, perhaps you weren't around or weren't of an age where you were really paying attention to this game with Michael Jordan back in 1997. I sure was. I was a senior in high school. You can do the math to find my age if you want. Although I've already disclosed my age in the body comp lab, I believe. So either way, this is a great instance where it was right in front of our eyes, the effects of being sick on performance. Michael Jordan chose to go out there. It was a playoff game. The team needed him. He's a professional. You could make an argument for that's more of a reason to get out there. We'll see what happened. Although he did pretty damn good, nailed the winning shot, but you can see I'm not looking well here along with Scottie Pippen. If you watched the ESPN documentary that came out recently about, I'm forgetting the name of what it was called, of course, about his career, Michael Jordan's career, they talk about this, and Michael Jordan claims that the night before, when they were in Utah, he ordered pizza, and he thinks that the people that delivered the pizza messed with it, and it was food poisoning. Other people don't necessarily... Oh, it's called The Last Dance. That's what it was called. Either way, it can have a real effect, and if you look at videos back on that game, he really looked like crap. But him being who he was, for that day, he was able to pull it together. This link might not be active anymore, but if you just search, I'm sure you can find it. Let's let's get into the science, folks. We can't have this discussion unless we talk about the immune system itself. We're going to break it down in a really simplistic way, but it's actually the same way I would begin to break it down to any class I'm teaching, even at a higher level. This is a really simplistic way of understanding the immune system. We basically have 3 lines of defense. Let me choose this green one. Let's say we have, let's see. This is Mr. Big Bad Virus. Anytime we have some kind of microbe or some kind of pathogen, it could be a virus, could be a bacteria, could be a fungus, could be a multitude of things, okay? We may have, let's see what color I can go with. Yes, let's go with blue. We may have Mr. Big Bad Virus trying to attack the body. And if a pathogen like Mr. Big Bad Virus tries to attack the body, our body is going to first throw at it what we consider our first line of defense. As we're going to find out, this has a lot to do with your skin. So we have this protective outer skin that is a protective barrier. So Mr. Big Bad Virus has to first try and penetrate our first line of defense. Now, if Mr. Big Bad Virus is able to penetrate our skin, and a lot of things are fended off by our skin, but indeed a lot of things can get through. If Mr. Big Bad Virus is able to penetrate through our skin, or maybe he's able to come in through our mouth when we open it, through our nose, those are routes also that he can come in. If the first line of defense is not able to protect us, then Mr. Big Bad Virus is going to be confronted with our second lines of defense. So if anything gets past our skin, our body is going to next throw at Mr. Big Bad Virus, our second line of defense. And this is going to include the actions of white blood cells. It's going to include the action of some special proteins. It's going to include the action of a fever. Sometimes our body purposely elevates its core temperature, knowing that certain bacteria and viruses cannot replicate as well at a higher temperature. But what if Mr. Big Bad Virus is so big and bad, he's able to get through our second line of defense? Our white blood cells can't get him. It's like a Pac-Man game. Again, I'm aging myself, but where the Pac-Man is trying to gobble up the bad guy, so our white blood cells are trying to gobble up Mr. Big Bad Virus, but what if they can't? Okay, Mr. Big Bad Virus is just too fast and too smart. When something penetrates through our second lines of defense, then our body has its last line of defense called our third line of defense. This is our last chance. And our third line of defense, as we're going to find out, is made up of more specific white blood cells. Maybe you've heard of them, like T cells as an example, that try and target it. So look at it that way, okay? We protect ourselves through these lines of defense. If something gets through our first line of defense, then we're going to confront it with our second line of defense. Only if our second line of defense can't kill it, only then do we activate our third line of defense. Here's more information. So when we talk about our first line of defense, we're talking mostly about our skin. But I want to point out that it is a physical barrier, but it is also a chemical barrier. So on the surface of our skin, we have some oil called sebum, and the oil in our skin has some antibacterial properties. Also included in our first line of defense would be our respiratory tract and our digestive tract. As I mentioned, you could have a pathogen, Mr. Big Bad Virus could come into our body through our mouth or through our nose. So what we have is in the lining of our respiratory tract, in the lining of our trachea and our lungs, In the tissue that lines our digestive organs, we have a specialized lining that in some places is very thick, that acts as a physical barrier, and in other places has chemicals that can act to kill bacteria and bad guys also. So I want to point out that even though we may think of our first line of defense as being mostly physical, it is also chemical. And our first line of defense is made up of our skin and our respiratory tract and digestive tract. Oops. Spelled that one wrong, didn't I? All right, so what if something gets past our first line of defense? Then we have our second line of defense. And our second line of defense, it's not just one thing. We have a whole cornucopia of fighters. We have some generic white blood cells. I'm going to simplify it over here. Generic white blood cells. Typically, we're thinking about our neutrophils and our macrophages. NK cells are pretty cool too. But our generic white blood cells, it's kind of like Pac-Man. And these white blood cells circulate in our bloodstream, and they will try and gobble up Mr. Big Bad Virus. Sometimes they're able to get them all, sometimes they can't. Included in our second line of defense are also some specialized proteins that I didn't talk about, complement proteins and interferons. You don't have to know those, but they're really cool. I mentioned fever, that when we purposely make our core temperature a little bit warmer, not too warm, but a slight fever, it's actually on purpose, because a slight fever makes our enzymes work faster, and it makes the reproduction rate of bacteria and viruses slower. And one that I didn't mention that I also would like to include in our second line of defense would be the inflammatory process. So sometimes we have inflammation that happens along with when we're attacked by a bacteria or virus. If we think about Mr. Big Bad Virus, maybe he gets into our respiratory tract, and as part of that, the inner lining of our respiratory tract gets inflamed. And while we think of that as a bad thing, it's kind of like the fever, where it's good in small amounts. We obviously don't want a fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit, but a fever of 99.5 degrees, while it's above normal body temperature, it's just a little bit hot, a little bit hotter, enough to help us. Same thing with inflammation. We like the initial inflammation because it brings in more white blood cells to help fight. It brings in more to help us kill the bad guys. But of course, too much inflammation is also bad. So we end up spending a lot of time trying to limit inflammation. But in small amounts, it can be a good thing. Now, I'm going to go back for a second, because when we looked at the first and second lines of defense, you can see that they are both what is called nonspecific. What that means is, nonspecific means that the defense is the same no matter what is attacking. So it doesn't matter if it's Mr. Big Bad Virus or Ms. Big Bad Virus or a bacteria or a fungus. It doesn't matter. Think of your skin. Your skin is the best example. Your skin doesn't care what's trying to attack. It's the same barrier no matter what. Your generic white blood cells are the same. Pac-Man is not specific. Pac-Man will gobble up any bad bacteria, any bad virus, anything that's bad. Okay, so our skin, how about I can't even talk. Our first and second lines of defenses are what's considered non-specific. They are the same defenses no matter what type of bacteria or virus or whatever is attacking. When we get to our third line of defense, let me go back for a second. It is only our third line of defense that is specific. And you can see I have a little trooper here on the right. If I continue with that analogy, we could consider the third line of defense like a sniper. If we think about the military, the first and second lines of defense, we need to be plural or not? The first and second lines of defense are just like your generic troops on the ground. Your generic troops on the ground are going to attack whatever's in its way. They're a little bit more general. We have more of them. But our third line of defense is like a highly trained sniper. What we're going to find out is these T cells, they're not like the Pac-Man, which is a generic white blood cell that gobbles up anything bad. A T cell is a specific fighter. It's like a sniper that only is going to attack certain things. It's very good at its job. A sniper is very, very highly specialized, but we couldn't rely on them only. All right, I got a picture. Here's the purple thing is a generic white blood cell. This is called a generic white blood cell. And, our white blood cells, they're pretty cool. They've got all sorts of adaptations. So here's a type of generic white blood cell called a macrophage. And it has these sticky extensions. And what can happen is Mr. Big Bad Virus can get stuck to those extensions. And what these white blood cells are going to do is they're going to bring in Mr. Big Bad Virus, and they're going to eat him and spit him out. This won't be on the test, it's just a fun picture. Okay, so if and only if a bacteria or virus gets past our first line of defense and gets past our second line of defense, only then will we enact our last and final third line of defense. These are our specific fighters. This is a specific defense, which means that it responds to specific bacteria or viruses. So each sniper is trained for a specific virus. And what makes up these are our T cells and B cells. Pretty cool. All right. This is a very generic explanation, but I think it gets the job done, okay? All right, let's get into the specifics. What about exercise and the immune system? So let's talk about why it could be a problem. And it's important for us to point out, exercise is a stress to the body. When we talk about stress to the body, it tends to only conjure up feelings of negative stress. Like I'm stressed out from work, I'm tired, I'm anxious, I'm overworked, I'm stressed out about a relationship, I'm emotional, I'm upset, I'm stressed, I'm tired. But it doesn't necessarily have to always be a bad thing. And exercise is a great example of that. Exercise is, when it's done properly, is a good stress to the body. This is what exercise is all about. We purposely put physical strain on the body. We purposely ask certain muscles to work. We purposely, in order to fuel those muscles, have to increase our heart rate, increase our cardiac output. Heart's got to pump harder for longer. We have to increase our blood pressure. We have to increase release of certain hormones at different times. We have to increase our delivery of nerve impulses to make sure these muscles are contracting when we need them to. We have to alter our metabolic processes. We already know this. When we exercise, that stress to the body causes the body to alter how it's making energy. Now we've got to all of a sudden metabolize more carbs. And then, oh my God, maybe we've got to metabolize more fat. This is all work to the body. But when done in appropriate amounts in the right way, it's a good stress because over the long term, it leads to positive adaptations. Okay, so when done properly, it's a good stress. When done properly, because it's going to enact or lead to positive adaptations, a lower resting heart rate, a stronger heart. We're going to burn more fat, make our blood vessels healthier. Now, of course, if we over-exercise or we don't give our body the rest it needs or we don't give our body the food it needs to fuel this exercise, then that good stress can turn into a bad stress. But it's important to point out that it is stress. And because it is a stress, it makes our body have to work harder. It can also be a psychological stress. In addition to the physical parameters, it can add psychological stress. You've got to psychologically get yourself out the door. You've got to psychologically manage this exercise session. So it's a stress psychologically. For most people, it's a good stress psychologically when done properly. But it is indeed a stress, and it should be treated as such. Now, the things to take home from this discussion. Exercise is a stressor to the body, physically and psychologically. These stressors from exercise are mostly good when we exercise at appropriate amounts in appropriate ways, meaning we give ourselves the recovery that we need, the food that we need, etc. This exercise stress could become bad if we don't give ourselves the things that we need in order to handle that stress. So you can look at the bottom here. One way that we can do that, in addition to exercising too much, too quickly, or too long, what if you have other stressors? So as an athlete working out in the world, I can probably safely say that the people I'm talking to are not professional athletes. Maybe you are, and that's great. But most of us are not. We've got to work to pay the bills. We've got things to take care of, right? So you have other stressors, and you have to balance. I could get into a whole little diatribe about properly setting up a workout program where you build, rest, build, rest. But you also have to make it appropriate for your lifestyle. If you are working a lot of hours, then you're not going to be able to handle a lot of exercise. You may want it to be different, but you just have to look at the facts. And if you are working a lot, then whatever time you set out for exercise, if you're working a lot, maybe you work out 3 times a week for an hour. And that's reasonable for your schedule. Then you can maximize those 3 hours a week. You can just make them at a higher intensity. But you have to be realistic, because if you add other stressors to the body, plus exercise, then you're adding more stress to your body and you're asking it to put up with more. And ultimately there's a breaking point. You can see one of those other stressors is illness. And if we stress our body too much, then all these stressors can depress the immune system. So you notice that we're not talking about exercise alone, because exercise is only one of the many stressors placed on our body. And I'm purposely framing the conversation this way, because you can't consider exercise alone. So if we think about our immune function, if our stressors end up being greater than our immune response, because even after an exercise session, Exercise puts stress on your body, and it puts stress on the immune system. After an exercise session, we have to have a higher release of cortisol. You're going to have a recovery process that mimics or includes some of the immune system. Okay? If our stressors, exercise, and others become greater than our ability to have the immune response to overcome it, then we can become sick. Then it will depress our immune system. But what if our stressors... having a hard time spelling this time. Have you noticing that? It really just points out how usually I spell things well. Haha. If our stressors are less than or equal to our immune response, then we can say we're balancing ourselves well. You probably want a better answer, like a straight up answer. If you have this much exercise and this much illness in you, stop! But it's not that simple because everybody has many other stressors. And not to mention that people handle stress differently, including exercise stress. Some people recover quicker than others just because of who you are. Some people, well, all people, as we age, I'm aging as an athlete and I do not recover as well as I used to. It's just a fact. So you have to consider all of those things. All right, so I have on here at the bottom a little symbol for the University of Illinois. It's my alma mater. I got my master's degree there. Go Illini. But one of the areas of research that has been a mainstay at their campus, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, in Champaign, Illinois, among the cornfields, is that they've done a lot of research on exercise and immune function. So they purposely had a control group and an experimental group, and they have put people under X amount of stress and measured the immune response to see that inflection point. At what point is exercise, along with the other factors, as best as we can measure them, at what point is exercise creating a negative impact on our body, on our immune system? And if I summarize what they found, here's what they found. Moderate exercise appears to improve immune function. So folks, moderate exercise in a reasonable amount, it makes your immune system better. It is a positive chronic adaptation, just like the many other positive adaptations that happen when we exercise. I mentioned a couple already. We get a stronger heart. We can decrease inflammation and clogging in our arteries. We can lower our resting heart rate. We can lower our resting blood pressure. Guess what? As a result of moderate exercise with appropriate rest in between, we can also improve our immune system. Of course, the word moderate is hard to quantify. Depends who you are. If you're just starting out with an exercise program, moderate exercise might be a 1-mile walk. If you've been exercising for years and you're adapted to a certain point, moderate exercise might be a 5-mile run. Okay? But it can actually improve the immune system. It makes our Pac-Man, generic white blood cells, better. You know why? Because our cardiac output is higher, so we can circulate more of those white blood cells around the bloodstream more quickly. Things like that. Now, heavy physical training can depress the immune function. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. That just means you have to understand this, right? So when you make out your workout plan, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Let's say that I'm going to choose a moderate workout. I'm going to rest on Wednesday. And then after my rest day is a great time to do a heavy workout. right? I've rested my body, so I'm more rested and able to do a heavy workout. Then maybe because I'm somewhat trained already, I do a moderate workout. And then guess what? I take a rest day and I do one more heavy here. So in other words, this is just an example, folks. In other words, you have to plan. When you do your heavy workouts, what do you notice? I have a recovery or rest day right before. I don't stack 2 heavy workouts back to back. Knowing that a heavy workout is going to depress my immune system, I need to make sure that I balance it with my other types of workouts. So it's not bad to do heavy physical training. You just have to have appropriate rest before and after and space it out properly. Now, you also want to build appropriately. So if you've never worked out before, you probably wouldn't want to go right into a heavy workout. It's going to depress your immune system right from the get-go. You're not ready for that. Build up to it. What does this also tell us? Well, it tells us if I'm not feeling well, if I have the sniffles and I'm feeling achy and not quite myself, do I want to do a heavy workout that day? If I don't have to? No. If I already have the symptoms that are telling me that I'm being invaded by bacteria and viruses, I don't want to do a heavy workout because then it's going to depress my immune system even more. But depending on how bad I'm feeling, depending on what else I've got going on that day or that week, maybe if it's not that bad of a sniffle and I got a decent amount of sleep the night before, maybe I do a light to moderate workout because maybe it can boost and make me fight it off better. And then I see how I feel. If I feel okay that day when I'm working out, come back, hydrate, eat well, get a good night's sleep. If I feel pretty good the next day, then maybe I did the right thing. So this is the thought process that you need to think about. If we think about heavy training, and when we say that heavy training, it could be heavy training because of a high intensity, but it could also be heavy training because of a long duration. So maybe each individual workout isn't really at that high of an intensity. But like I said, when I was doing the Ironman training, I mentioned this in the last video, probably peak Ironman training, I would be exercising 20 hours a week. It's like a part-time job. So 20 hours a week is long duration. So I would quantify that as heavy. So the effects of heavy training, just because of the effects of duration, tend to be more of a problem with endurance athletes. They really need to balance their load. Listen, folks, I cannot work out 20 hours a week year-round. Neither can a professional athlete, by the way. The body just can't take it. So it's an issue of balancing that load. And during the preseason, when I need to ramp up the most and right before an event, that's when I'm doing my heavy training. During the off season, I'm doing some training, but I'm not doing 20 hours a week. When you work out too heavy of a load, you will begin to break your body down. You're not giving it enough time to recover. And included in that would be your immune system. Okay, so it's most problematic in endurance athletes, and I mean negative effects of heavy training. When you train for so long like that, you're more susceptible to an infection. Didn't mean to cross that out, I meant to underline it. So when you're under that heavy training load, you're more likely to get sick because the heavy load depresses your immune system. Maybe when you're training for a certain event, you have to train heavy. Okay, but just know that you're more susceptible if you're exposed to something. So what does that mean? It means schedule your heavy workouts well, appropriate rest before and after, get enough sleep, make sure you're eating well, all those things. All right. In addition to the effects of exercise on the immune system, we have to address the other half of the equation. We addressed calories out, calories expended through exercise. Now we need to address calories in. What about the food we eat and its impact on our immune system? I'm going to let Homer Simpson tell you this one. Guess what? A good diet improves your immune system. Giving your body the right tools, the right fuel, makes your immune system work better. No surprise there. Someone who's got a crap diet does not have as good of an immune system. Period. Does that mean that they can never fight off something? Of course not. But diet can make your immune system better. All right, so I've got some specifics here, and I'm not going to have you know it all. I just wanted to give you the information, and we'll talk about some of them. For example, when you have an appropriate amount of carbohydrates, it actually slows the release of cortisol. And cortisol is our stress hormone. After a long workout, you of course will release cortisol. It's a recovery hormone. You have to. Cortisol is what helps to break down some muscle tissue so then it can later be repaired and replaced. But if we release too much cortisol, it can actually suppress your immune system as well. So having enough carbs helps to make sure that we don't over-release or release too much cortisol. I'm not going to ask you that, but it's there. Of course, we know that the main function of carbohydrates is as a fuel source. And all of the white blood cells, the specialized proteins, all of the specialized B and T cells, they need energy to function. So if we're going to have those snipers on the ground, the B cells and T cells killing Mr. Big Bad Virus, they need energy. So having appropriate energy will help the immune system. You can read about protein. If you don't have enough protein, you can't make enough of your immune cells. And having abnormal protein can also decrease your immune system function. That's not usually a problem because we tend to have enough protein in our diets here in the U.S. I want to talk about the vitamins and minerals. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, they matter. Even though we don't need as many of them in our diet, they're so important for a lot of things that help our immune system. Those antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E, the B vitamins, which help us to give energy to our cells, iron, which helps us to transport oxygen so we can get oxygen to our immune cells, zinc is, its function is to help the immune system. Okay? Having an appropriate amount is so important. You can read here, having a deficiency is bad, having an excess is bad. We are really not at risk of having an excess in this country for most people. But I do want to point out these three as important for the immune system. We've got 2 minerals and a set of vitamins. Okay, so what's best? Well, no surprise here. When we talk about our immune system, have a good diet. Not that everyone's perfect. I had a heavy training week this past weekend, and my body was just craving something. I mean, I biked, not that I'm meaning to brag or anything, but I biked 664 miles in July. So I reached a peak period this past weekend, and my body just needed the rest, and I wanted some cookies, and I got some cookies because my body needed it, and that's okay. But I don't have cookies every day, probably once a week. So have a well-balanced diet. It may not be perfect, but well-balanced. You also want to match your diet intake with your exercise. So know when you're exercising more and you got to up it. I know for me, when I'm exercising so much, sometimes I'm not that hungry. So I have to just kind of force myself to eat little bits often. Or I often find that the next day or two, when I'm resting, my body's trying to catch up and I'm so hungry. Setting up your training plan properly so you apply a good exercise stress. You don't overdo it. Folks, every athlete needs rest. If If you don't believe me, listen to the new ESPN 30 for 30 podcast series on USA Gymnastics. In addition to talking about Dr. Larry Nassar and the sexual abuse, it also talks about the training program that they went through. Never a day off, so many injuries, not good, folks. So even the best of athletes need rest, because that's when your body recovers. If you can minimize life stress, not always able to do that. So if you have higher stress, you need to take out some other stress somewhere. That can be a little tricky. Like for me, if I'm stressed with something else in my life, doing exercise can actually be a stress reliever. It's my time out in the sun. I get my anger out. But other times, getting that in just turns out to be too much stress. So you just have to learn yourself. Learn that about yourself. Get enough rest. More and more researchers are finding rest is important for everyone, especially athletes. Now that we're such a technology society, maybe you're familiar with something called the Whoop device. I have not become a convert yet, but there's a Whoop device which basically measures your rest and recovery. A lot of endurance athletes utilize this, so a lot of cyclists, triathletes, distance runners, and you put in a lot of data, and it measures their heart rate and some other metrics, and it tells you when you're in the green, well recovered and rested, when you're in the red, when you're at a high intensity exercise and need more recovery. It's pretty interesting. I know a lot of athletes use it and think it's great, and a lot of times it tells them to sleep more. It also can tell you about the quality of your sleep based on your heart rate and some other things. So even though you were in bed for 8 hours, you probably weren't actually getting good rest for those 8 hours. And then just pay attention, folks. We're all so different, so you got to learn this for yourself. That balance is really hard. Sometimes I don't even know the answer. Should I exercise today or not? Mostly I push myself out the door because usually it's good for me. But every once in a while I'm learning life's too stressful, man, and I need that day off. Or if you're feeling sick, know where that balance is. All right. I like this slide because I want to point out something. We are always going to have things attacking our body. There is always Mr. Big Bad Viruses. So it's not that you only are exposed to viruses when you're feeling sick. You're always exposed to these things. I mean, think about the door handle you touch in the public restroom. Ugh. But hopefully, from childhood, you've built up a good immune system, and it's par for the course. So we're exposed to bacteria and viruses all the time. And our immune system, to a small level, is functioning all the time. You always have little Pac-Man generic white blood cells trying to gobble up bad things. Okay? The only time that you get sick is when your stressors, and I'm going to add exposure to viruses and bacteria. You only get sick when these stressors are greater than our immune response. Because our immune system is always working, usually we don't get sick. Usually, let's say I'm exposed to 100 pathogens a day. And if I'm exposed to 100 pathogens a day, my immune system can easily get rid of 100 pathogens a day. So I don't have any signs and symptoms of illness. I don't have a sore throat. I don't feel achy or tired because my immune system is keeping up. So that's why I have this picture of a race. We have your immune system, and then we have viruses and bacteria. It's a race. Usually our immune system can keep up with getting rid of bacteria and viruses, so we don't even feel a thing. But if our stressors, including exercise, including exposure to bacteria and viruses, if they become greater in number and magnitude than our immune response, then we get sick. All right, In terms of exercise, it's not an easy yes or no. If you are not feeling well, maybe the answer is sometimes yes, exercise, maybe sometimes no. If you are truly sick, people know when you're truly sick. If you're vomiting, if you have diarrhea with other symptoms, take a day off. Take 2 days off depending on your symptoms. Any person who puts training programs together for athletes will tell you that. And if they're not, then they don't know what they're talking about. If you are truly sick, any exercise you can do is A, going to depress your immune system more, and you're going to end up being sick longer. But when you're really sick, doing exercise, you're not getting your best out of it. So what is the point? Mentally, it might make you feel better. But if you're sick and you're out there and you can only get to half the intensity of what you usually do, you're not going to get any positive physical adaptation out of that. So it's better, if you're really sick, cut your losses. Take a day or two off. Get your body right. And then, when you're ready, when you're healthy, go back to training, and you'll be able to go back at your full potential. And if you're well trained, you don't have to necessarily, quote unquote, make it up. In other words, if I miss a training session, like happens in life every once in a while, I don't have to double my workout the next day. Maybe I add 10 minutes to the next 3 days' workouts to get a little bit of that back. But the idea that you have to make it up in full, you're just going to dig yourself into a bigger hole. That's the last slide, but I want to summarize. If you're, like I said before, if you're feeling a little sniffle, not quite right, you have to know yourself. Maybe doing some moderate exercise will be good. Because we know moderate exercise can actually boost your immune system. I would not do a heavy workout day when you're not feeling well. Of course, there's always going to be caveats. What if it's the state championship game and you're not feeling well? Well, when else are you going to have the opportunity? Get out there if you can. But you also have to be realistic. Because if you're feeling that bad that you're not going to be able to compete at the level you need to, you might risk getting hurt. Think about football. If you're not at your best out there, you're going to get hurt. Okay? All right, folks. That's the best I got. Great job over this course. Keep it up for this last part of the course and the final exam. Hope you learned something in addition to doing well in the exams, because that's not the only thing that we care about. And I'm always here if you have questions. All right, great job.